Dear everyone, welcome to the launch of the Stalking and Harassment and Investigation of Experiences in Ireland. Just to let you know that we are recording the presentation, so you will be, we will stop though for the Q&A at the end of the session. So just to briefly outline the structure of today, before I hand you over to Dr. Kubi, who is the Director of the Centre for Criminal Justice and Human Rights, who will introduce the programme of events. So just briefly to say that after the introduction by Dr. Kubi, myself and Dr. Staunton, who are the co-authors of the report, will present some findings from the report, and then there will be a panel discussion with various people who have been very active in terms of getting us to the stage where we are about to have a new stalking offence introduced into law, and then finally we will have a Q&A with everyone who is in attendance. So for the moment, I know that I have muted everybody just to stop noises in the background. But obviously, when there's a Q&A, please raise your hand, and we'll be more than happy to invite you to ask your question, or you can also chat. Okay, so I would like to hand the mic over to Dr. Kubi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, and good evening to everyone who's here on this call. Catherine asked me just to say a few words about the Centre for Criminal Justice and Human Rights at the beginning of this event. And so the CCJHR, as we call ourselves, was established in the School of Law in 2006 to study the topical and challenging issues at the intersection of criminal justice and human rights. And the Centre seeks to contribute to national and international debates through the promotion of cutting-edge interdisciplinary research, strategic partnerships with governmental, statutory and non-governmental organisations, and innovative programmes of legal education. And the research which Ciara and Catherine have undertaken on stalking and harassment in Ireland is exemplary of the research that we hope to promote. Many of you may have seen the media coverage which their report has generated over the course of today, and I'm sure that their far-reaching but entirely realistic recommendations will lead to systemic and legislative change, which will lead to the protection or greater protection for the victims of stalking and harassment. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues in the UCC Adult Continuing Education Centre, the Cork Sexual Violence Centre and TUSLA, who were partners in this research. And most importantly, I'd like to recognise the bravery of all the participants who shared their insights and experiences for this report. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Catherine now.
Thank you very much, Doug. It's great to acknowledge the respondents at the outset of this session, because the report would not exist but for their willingness to give up of their time and to fill out the report and share what have been very difficult experiences for them with us, with the hope of helping to improve the experiences of others. With that, I would like to thank you all for coming to this launch, and it's based on the findings of an online survey that Dr. Staunton and I ran between November 2021 and February 2022, with the support offered to respondents by the Sexual Violence Centre of Cork. We were prompted to do this research by Una Ring and Eve McDougall, both of whom endured experiences of stalking and harassment at the hands of two men, both of whom were subsequently convicted. And their view was that the offence of harassment did not capture the harm that they experienced. And they joined together to campaign for the introduction of a new stalking offence. Initially, a proposal for a new stalking offence was put forward by Senator Lisa Chambers, with input from various people who will be on the panel discussion with us after this initial presentation. The proposal then was taken up by the government and included in their new Criminal Justice Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2022, which will hopefully be enacted shortly. In this presentation, I am going to firstly set out briefly some of the context behind this law reform before handing over to Dr. Staunton, who will present some findings from the online survey, specifically respondent demographics, who engages in stalking, the types of behaviours that stalkers and harassers engage in, the psychological, physiological, economic and social consequences of stalking on the person who's subjected to it, and the types of reactions that the respondents took in response to this behaviour, including reporting to GARDA SÍOCHÁNA. And then we will end on some of the recommendations that we introduce in the report. So the first thing I just wanted to mention is that in Europe, EU member states are required, subject to the issuing of a reservation, to criminalise stalking as part of a suite of measures designed to ensure the protection and reduce gender-based violence against girls and women. This obligation is set out in Article 34 of what is known as the Istanbul Convention. This was adopted in 2011 and entered into force in 2014. There is not yet a specific stalking offence in Ireland, but it was thought that we were covered by Section 10 of the 1997 Non-Fatal Offences Against the Person Act, which criminalised harassment. This harassment offence, when it was introduced, was intended to criminalise both stalking and harassment. I suppose just to note that Ireland wasn't unique in this conflation of stalking and harassment. All jurisdictions with a common law tradition in Europe, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Malta, originally enacted harassment offences that were intended to also cover stalking. However, arguments from various anti-stalking campaigners that stalking is a qualitatively worse experience than harassment has convinced all of these jurisdictions to implement additional stalking offences. In the United Kingdom, the first jurisdiction to do so was Scotland, followed by England itself in 2012, and most recently Northern Ireland in 2022. Post-Brexit, there are only two countries in Europe which have a common law tradition, Malta, which is a mixed common and civil jurisdiction, and ourselves. Malta, as you can see on the slide, introduced a standalone stalking offence in 2015. And as noted, we in Ireland are currently in the process of introducing our own stalking offences included in the 2022 bill. The first thing to note is this section, or this bill, intends to replace the current Section 10 of the 1997 Act, the harassment offence, with an entirely new text. So there will be a new subsection 1, which will modify the existing offence of harassment. There'll be a new subsection 2, which will create the new stalking offence. There will be a new subsection 3, which will give examples of the types of behaviours that could constitute stalking or harassment, while Section 10.4 will allow for the imposition of a restraining order post-conviction. Also worth noting that Section 16 of the 2022 bill, as initiated, I think it's now Section 27 post various amendments, will also allow for the imposition of a restraining order without the necessity of a criminal conviction. And although, as we note in the report, there are ways in which we think that the wording of the stalking offence could be improved, we welcome the government's intention to introduce a new stalking offence, and it brings us into line not only with the other common law jurisdiction in the EU, but also with our common law neighbours. I will now turn to the survey itself and hand you over to Dr. Staunton, who will present the first set of findings for us.
Thanks very much, Catherine, and good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for giving up your time to be with us this evening. First, just to say that we really had three main aims of the study, and as Catherine alluded to, it really has been prompted by Una and Dee, who were pivotal in being so vocal about their own experiences, and also to Mary Crilly, who was such an advocate for all things gender-based violence with the Cork Sexual Violence Centre. So the main aims of our study were as follows, and initially we wanted to provide an authentic voice to those who have experience of these crimes. So we wanted to provide some kind of quantitative data on the stalking and our harassment process. So move it away from this anecdotal story-based evidence to something that alluded to proper evidence-based findings. We wanted to evaluate the wording of the proposed stalking offence with reference to this quantitative data to help ensure that it is sufficiently broad to capture the behaviours experienced by those subjected to stalking in Ireland. And finally, we wanted to provide an initial snapshot of the reasons for reporting are not the behaviours experienced to on Garda Síochána. So those were our main objectives at the commencement of the research. What I'm going to present now is just a snapshot of our initial findings. They are provided quite comprehensively in the report, but to give you an overview. So first of all, I should say that we had over 1,000 responses to this online survey. Now, bearing in mind, it was only open for a few months, between November 2021 and February 2022. I think we were surprised by that level of engagement with an online survey, and I think that in itself is revealing to the extent of the issue of the crime that we are talking about here. By and large, our sample consisted mainly of women. We also had some male individuals, as you can see here on the graph, but the majority of our respondents were female. They were also young, with a median age of 35, a mean age of 35 and a median age of 34. Also, our sample was predominantly Irish. In terms of who engages in the stalking process, this was an obvious question to ask. We were less interested in the motives of the offender in this piece of research, and we really wanted to look at it from the respondent perspective. So the question we asked was, who was the person who was engaging in these behaviours against you? This has been a very revealing and interesting finding. It is largely consistent with the international literature and research in this area. You can see here from the graph very clearly that in over half of our cases that the perpetrator is a partner, either an ex or current partner of the individual, so 468. This was followed by a stranger, but when you account for an acquaintance, a friend, a work colleague with the partner and ex-partner, you will again see that the vast majority of individuals can identify and name who is perpetrating these behaviours against them. Okay. In terms of the stalking process, we really wanted to reveal what it consists of. So we may have some stereotypical views of what stalking is based on what we see on the TV, based on celebrity cases. So we wanted to get under the hood of this a bit. So our research has found that there are 4 key areas with which the behaviours can be categorised. The first is unwanted behaviours, threats and abuse, malicious communications, and reputational damage. So the next few slides are going to highlight exactly what constitutes each of these categories. So within the unwanted behaviour categories, you can see here very clearly that the most common form of unwanted behaviour, as reported by the respondents, was making unwanted approaches to you. So that kind of nuisance behaviour. Being followed, the second one, the person loitering around your home or place of work that you frequent. Fourthly, being spied upon. Fifthly, being made unwanted approaches to in terms of friends, family or colleagues. Having damaged property or things being interfered with, and more seriously, having your home broken into. So again, these counts reveal the numbers of respondents who identify these behaviours as having been perpetrated against them. The next slide, in terms of direct threats and abuse. So perpetrators who threaten to harm you or those close to you directly or indirectly. So again, this is a very malicious form of stalking behaviour that you can see here is quite common among our respondents. It also highlights that emotionally manipulative aspect to the stalking process. Very worryingly here, we have actual reports of both physical and sexual assaults. So these are, serious crimes being perpetrated against individuals as part of an overall stalking picture. We also have here representation of perpetrators who threaten to harm themselves around the individual, again, highly reminiscent of the manipulative nature of the stalking process. In terms of malicious communications, again, a very high proportion of our respondents indicating that they were sent inappropriate letters, texts, WhatsApp or emails. They were also had malicious or inappropriate telephone calls made to them, and they were also the recipients of unwanted and uninitiated gifts. Each of these behaviours in and of themselves may be categorised as more nuisance, but again, it's the compound effect of multiple behaviours over time which reveals that whole process and trajectory of the stalking process. Finally, the final category was reputational damage. And this is a more indirect tactic used by stalkers. You can see here again a number of key behaviours identified by our respondents. The most common one here being having pictures taken or recordings of the individual without their consent. The perpetrator engaging in inappropriate or malicious social media contacts, either by Twitter or Facebook. Having images, private images being shared that are of a very personal nature. Having false allegations made about them, having false legal actions initiated against the individual, or other malicious material that has been distributed by the perpetrator. Again, these highlight just the lengths that perpetrators will go to wreak havoc with the individual's life. The purpose of the research also was to be victim focused and victim centric, and we wanted to identify the effects of these behaviours on those who have experienced them. Again, we identified 4 broad categories of consequences of stalking. These are social, financial, physical and psychological. And what the research reveals for us here is a broad panoply of effects within each of these categories. So within the social and financial, we see a number of reports here. So the top one here, over 400, so almost half of our sample, indicating that they did have to suffer the expense of counselling or therapies, as well as maybe legal advice or installing security systems. We see here people who have changed up their own routines. This is in order of self-preservation to protect themselves or to avoid the perpetrator. So changing their routes home from work or school, giving up social activities, stopping or leaving the house altogether, so on and so forth. So we really capture here how the person who is suffering or who has been targeted by a stalker, how their lives are impacted in several different ways, and how in fact their lives are railroaded via the nature of the stalking that has been perpetrated against them. In terms of physical and psychological consequences, perhaps no surprise here, but very revealing in terms of the myriad of consequences that people suffer from. Top of the list here, with 750 people identifying anxiety and fear, which is of course the exact target of the stalker. This is exactly what they want to induce within those who they are targeting. Increased distrust. We have then consequences which are physical and medical, sleep disturbances, depression, paranoia, anger, panic attacks, right down to very severe behaviours such as self-harming behaviours and suicidal attempts. So again, it's the compound effect of a number of these which would warrant many respondents likely receiving a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. It was interesting to note some of the actions and reactions of respondents when asked what they actually did in response to some of these behaviours. So we can see here a large proportion of our sample did actually ask the person who was engaging in these behaviours to stop and to leave them alone, bearing in mind now that these individuals will know the stalker. So this is a reasonable kind of behaviour you might expect from somebody, that they might ask them to stop. Second highest here was confront the person engaging in the behaviours, actions, again presumably asking them to stop. We have a proportion of the sample here who did report to the police, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Interestingly, and it's good to note that quite a number of our respondents started to collect evidence, which is a good practice and will be part of the information campaign that we would recommend that people do. Keeping a log is another example, having a safety plan. But most worryingly and most strikingly here, you can see here at the bottom, over 100 participants, 114 in fact, did resort to carrying a weapon, which indicates just how fearful they must have felt in relation to their own safety and protection.
So I'm going to now focus on some of the answers to questions around reporting to Garda Síochána specifically. As you can see here, there was quite good levels of reporting to Garda Síochána. 42% of our respondents did report their experiences. And our initial review of these responses tells us that there was 5 key reasons why people chose to report. These are that the respondent had reached the limits of what they could endure, that they were afraid because of the nature of the behaviour, or that the behaviour had escalated. It could also be on the advice of someone that they trusted that they should report, and finally out of concern for others, either for others that they knew or some future unknown others. International research tells us that those who report their stalking experiences to the police do not always have positive experiences in doing so. They describe being not believed, being victim blamed, their experiences being trivialized as merely domestics, and not being treated sympathetically. And our respondents raised similar issues in our survey. We found that negative experiences of reporting outweighed positive experiences, but it should be noted that some of those negative experiences weren't just about the Garda Síochána specifically, but more about the broader criminal justice process around prosecution and so on. Quite a number of our respondents criticised limitations in the law, which are clearly there. But also it became clear to us that some members of Garda Síochána didn't seem to understand what the law provided. There seemed to be a bit of confusion around what the current offence of harassment provides. This response, for example, shows a lack of understanding, suggesting that harassment requires some physical harm to be perpetrated before it becomes something that the Gardaí can respond to. We note that in other jurisdictions such as England and Wales, they have had similar experiences where members of the police are not really certain around the parameters of the relevant offence of harassment, and that confusion seems to have carried forward into the offence of stalking when it was introduced there. We also saw that a number of our respondents talked about being victim blamed, and this was often in the context of where there was a prior relationship with the perpetrator. And given what we have said in relation to the high proportion of our respondents who were in relationships either currently or previously with the perpetrator, I think this is something that needs to be shared with Garda Síochána specifically. You know, that prior relationships are a predictor of violence as opposed to being an excuse for it. Features of positive experiences were being taken seriously and being believed, and also very importantly being followed up. So it was all well and good to have a positive initial reporting experience, but if you weren't updated on how your case was progressing, the respondents began to ask themselves why they had bothered reporting in the first place. Several respondents explicitly recommended that the Gardaí receive training on both the impacts of stalking and also on the contents of the law. And you can see here that members of various respondents noted that the Gardaí seemed to require physical harm before they would take a complaint seriously, which again, as I wish to repeat, is not a requirement of the current offence of harassment and will not be a requirement of the offence of stalking when it is introduced. With regard to reasons for not reporting, the two most common reasons of interest to us are kind of captured in this one quote. These are the fear that they would not be believed, and also a belief that maybe the behaviour lacked seriousness. Sometimes it was a belief that the Gardaí would not regard the behaviour as being serious, even though the respondent personally felt that it was serious, or alternatively it was that maybe they did not regard it as being serious themselves. These two reasons then were often in combination with a third reason, perhaps that the respondent was young at the time and did not realise that the perpetrator's behaviour was wrong. A fourth common reason for not responding was that respondents had either personal or general knowledge of other reports being dismissed. And also concerns around Garda Síochána not taking gender-based violence seriously. So didn't think that reports of stalking or harassment would be taken seriously either. Finally, respondents chose not to report for self-preservation reasons. Self-blame, fear of being victim-blamed, and the desire to protect their privacy were common features in this category of reason. So the final thing that we want to cover are rather some of the recommendations that we made. We made 10 recommendations based around 3 core areas that you can see on the slide there. The first 3 of the 10 recommendations focus on an information campaign for the public. We think this is really important because, as some of the responses have indicated, there is sometimes a lack of recognition of what stalking and harassment is, or that the respondent had in fact been subjected to these experiences. 1 or 2 respondents, for instance, revealed that they hadn't even realised that what they had experienced was stalking or harassment until they took the survey. So there is clearly a need to inform people about the process of stalking and to help them recognise the criminal behaviour that they are being subjected to, so that they can report it before it escalates into some of the more serious permutations of those behaviours. We also highlight the importance of providing dedicated funding to service providers, because with an information campaign are going to come more requests for support from those who have experienced stalking and harassment. And the data tells us that there are currently gaps in the service provision that we have for those who experience stalking and harassment. So, for example, while 52% of our respondents were targeted by current or ex-partners, and so could seek support, for example, from relationship violence services, 48% were not. Similarly, 44% of our respondents experienced sexual violence, but 56% did not. So they would be excluded from the services of sexual violence centres. We also then have 4 recommendations with regard to the wording of the stalking offence. These recommendations are based on the data that the survey unearthed, which has emphasised how significant an impact stalking has on those against whom it is perpetrated, and on the day-to-day activities and lives of those who are targeted. And we believe that this is a harm that is worth recognising, and we should not risk setting too high a threshold before the Gardaí might intervene, or before a person who's been subjected to these behaviours might feel comfortable reporting these behaviours. So it's about thinking about how we can better protect those who are experiencing stalking in this jurisdiction. Finally, we have 3 recommendations around reporting to Garda Síochána, and these are focused on assisting Garda Síochána to better meet the needs of those who report stalking and harassment. These focus on providing training to the force about the particulars of the 2 offences, so what the law actually provides, and also about the process and effects of stalking and harassment, so as to maybe push them away from the traditional focus that police forces have all over the world on incident-based crimes, and focusing then on stalking as being an example of a process where it is a pattern of behaviour rather than individual instances that are the cause of the harm. What we propose to do next is to have a panel discussion with Una Ring, who is a prominent anti-stalking campaigner, Rebecca Cohen from the Law Reform Commission, Senator Lisa Chambers, and Mary Crilly from the Sexual Violence Centre, Cork. This is to broaden out discussion from the specifics of the report to where the impetus for the new offence came from and why it's needed. And as I say, after this panel discussion, we will stop the recording and broaden and open up to the floor for a Q&A. Just for your information there, just put up some support services information there in case anyone would like them. So I will stop sharing now, and I will ask the panel to unmute so that we can and turn on your cameras if you haven't already got them on, and we can start our discussion. So I suppose, Una, if I could maybe ask you to start with you, maybe to talk about you know, what your experiences have been in terms of pushing for the introduction of the new stalking offence.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks Catherine and Keir for the phenomenal work to get the report done. I suppose the first thing I need to say really is I was actually very, very lucky in my case in that when I reported to the guards, they actually took it very serious from the outset. But also the other reason why I was so lucky in it being, I suppose, it sounds awful, but an easy case to prosecute is because all the evidence was left there for them. So my advice to anybody would be, like, when I initially went to the guards, I had a log of, I had all the text messages, all the WhatsApp messages, all the missed calls. I had a screenshot of everything, and that's what I went in with first. So just for anybody who is reporting to make sure they have something, because with like 5.2 of the report, the stalking process, figure 5 is the reputational damage, and one of those is to make false complaints about you. Now that could be somebody going into the guards and saying that I'm stalking them, making a false complaint. So that's why I suppose you do need to have something to show the guards that this is actually happening, as opposed to, because from their point of view, it could be legitimate. It might not be. It might be somebody making false allegations. So I suppose they have to be careful on their side. So I think that's why it is very important to have everything written down, times, dates, places, and as well what that person was wearing, so that if they go back over CCTV, they'll be able to see that person. They'll stand out and they say, yeah, they actually were following them on such and such a date. And I suppose the other thing that I was very happy with was like the pushing from, I suppose, Lisa Chambers really in getting the law you know, pushed through as far as she did. And I suppose, like, yeah, that was very good as well. Only for Lisa, like, we gave her the words and she gave us the voice as such, because everything we said she took notice of, and she was able to bring that to the public domain and, you know, make it happen, I suppose, really.
Great, thank you. Maybe before I ask the Senator Chambers to speak, maybe Rebecca, you'd like to come in, because you would have been, as someone within the Law Reform Commission, you would have seen the Law Reform Commission changing its position in relation to the necessity for a stalking offence, because within the space of 3 years, the position changed quite significantly.
It did, and I think, you know, I previously worked as a prosecutor in the office of the DPP for almost 15 years. And I think that, you know, what's really important about today and about the report is to see the impact. We, working in criminal justice, had looked at this offence over 25 years, the offence of harassment, and didn't see the difficulty with it because it was functioning. But it took Una and Eve to identify the real difficulties in terms of the labelling of that offence and its inadequacy to really start that national conversation. And as you said, Catherine, the Law Reform Commission had actually recommended that a separate stalking offence should be introduced to mark its particular impact and the particular distinctions that are there between harassment and stalking. So it's a testament to Una and Eve's determination. And you know, I think it's so important to have as well. Something that we don't have enough of in Irish criminal justice is empirical research. So it's, you know, credit is due to the funders also, as well as to yourselves for doing the work, but to actually put the investment into empirical analysis so that when laws are being drafted, that they can be drafted in a way that is responsive to people's lived experience and that is, you know, very reflective of the type of harm that we're trying to criminalise, and to do that effectively.
Maybe I could come to you now, Lisa, because you spearheaded the predecessor to the offence that is now part of the 2022 bill. Would you like me to talk about what prompted you to work with Una and Eve on this, and what your experience has been in terms of pushing that through?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and hi to everyone. It's been great listening to the findings of the report, and just want to commend the work that went into bringing the report to fruition and to launching it today. And it's a great body of work, and it will be very useful going forward. So just to commend the authors and all those involved. It's a fantastic piece of work, and you should be very proud of it. And it's great to be here today to be launching such a report. I think it's you know, it's a pivotal moment. We've come a long way in a relatively short space of time from when we started working on this to getting to this point. So you know, a pat on the back for everybody, because I think it's well deserved. So you asked two questions, Catherine. Where did the bill come from, and then why was it needed? So where it came from, or how I got involved, I was in the car on the way to Leinster House, heading up for work one Tuesday morning, and I heard Eve and Una on Pat Kenny detailing their harrowing experiences, what they had been through, and, you know, speaking about the fact there was no standalone stalking offence. And I was sitting there thinking, well, that's ridiculous for starters, and I can't believe it's not properly legislated for, and I'm in a position to do something about it. So I reached out to Eve and Una through their website, Stalking Ireland, or stalking.ie, and got in contact with the two ladies, and it kind of went from there. I mean, I think the telling of their personal stories from Una Ring and Eve McDougall has been so powerful, and that's why we've gotten such momentum behind the issue. We've gotten so much coverage of the issue. We've brought it to the public in a way that was never done before, because they shared their personal experience. And I think both women should be commended for that, because it's a really difficult thing to do, to share, you know, personal details to that extent. But they did so because they knew that by doing it, it was the best chance they had of getting the law changed, and they achieved their objective with my help and with yours as well, Catherine. You were there in the early days when we started drafting the bill, so I want to thank you for your work in helping draft as well. You know, it was really down to Eve and Una's just sheer determination to not have any other person go through what they did and have to deal with an inadequate legal system where the law really just wasn't catering properly for this offence. So that's kind of where the bill came from. We got about to drafting it. I met with Eve and Una. We sat down and we just talked about the different nuances that were needed. I remember Una saying to me how important it was to have pets referenced in the legislation, because they can often be used to get to a person as well. So things that people hold dear, that we made sure that the law, as best it could reflect every possible eventuality. So at the outset, the Justice Department were not in favour of the legislation, so we brought forward the Criminal Justice Stalking Amendment Bill, and that was the bill that we drafted together. And the Department of Justice initially were saying, no, it's not needed, the law is sufficient. And then they ultimately changed their mind, which was great. And we had a female Justice Minister who worked with us, Helen McEntee, and that's how we ended up with the Criminal Justice Miscellaneous Provisions Bill that's now working its way through the Dáil and will be coming to me in the Seanad in April, and hopefully passing all stages by the end of April. So, you know, we've from starting off, really, it was kind of an uphill battle. And then once the momentum started, but really the credit goes to Una and Eve, because they were out. Any radio station, TV outlet that would take them on, they were out delivering that message, bringing the message to so many people. And it was amazing, the response we kept getting back. I remember Pat Kenny asking the question, how is that not already a criminal offence? People were kind of almost dumbfounded that it wasn't already legislated for. I think the assumption was that was already done. So that's how we got to where we are with the current legislation. And obviously we met with the Justice Minister as well to advance matters. And then, Catherine, why is it needed? So a lot of research has been done by yourself and others, and by Una and Eve as well. But if we look to other jurisdictions, and I would often reference the UK, for example, Scotland, England and Wales, where they've had a standalone offence in some parts for more than a decade. And it did have a direct impact in that, one, it highlighted to people that what was happening to them was wrong, and it encouraged people to come forward in circumstances where maybe ordinarily they wouldn't have. So it increased reporting of the offence, and ultimately that led to an increase in prosecutions. And that's why we wanted to have the standalone offence. You know, technically you could prosecute many stalking instances using existing laws, but they're inadequate because they don't say what it is directly. It's not explicit. The Gardaí, as you've seen from your own research, Catherine, the Gardaí were finding it difficult to use the existing legislation, and it was confusing, and it wasn't catering for all eventualities. So for all of those reasons, we needed to update our laws, have a very clear, standalone, explicit criminal offence of stalking, call it what it is. And then it's much more easy to prosecute, it's more easy to make a complaint, and it makes it more accessible for the public as well. So they were the key reasons why we felt the bill was needed. And I think anyone we've spoken to or engaged with, we never had any, bar the Department of Justice initially, we've never had any pushback really on the need for this legislation. It was just about making sure that we got it to the top of the agenda, got the legislation through, and because the bill that we drafted passed all stages in the Shannon, it put that little bit of pressure on the department and the minister to take it forward now and finalise it. And very happy to say that Una and Eve and myself met with Minister for Justice Simon Harris a number of weeks ago, and he was able to give us a clear commitment that he intends to have it passed all stages by the end of April in both houses. So we're nearly there. And yeah, it's just been great to be a part of it and to be involved, and to have been able to work with two amazing women, Una and Eve, throughout the process. Has been incredible.
Thank you. Mary, coming to you, you obviously have decades of experience working with those who have experienced sexual violence. How have you, and I know that you've been working with those who have been stalked. How have you found, have you found that they have particular needs, and what would be your wish list?
I have a wish list, all right. And I'd like to kind of say over the past 40 years, we've seen hundreds of people over the years who would have been stalked by partners, by friends, by people they knew intimately. Like what I'm finding now since we started stalking.ie, and since we're quite visible with stalking in Ireland.ie, stalking in Ireland.ie, that the 1/3 we're dealing with, the 1/3 who haven't been sexually assaulted are the ones who are coming to us. And I'd like to get the message across that, you know, to come to us for a service in stalking in Ireland.ie, you do not have to be sexually assaulted. Very often there's a threat there, like two young women who we met, this guy drives up and down their cul-de-sac every week, and sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. The fear is there that he's going to do something, but they feel there's nothing they can capture. So we support people like that. We're supporting quite a lot of businessmen who are saying they're stalked in different situations. So doing this, and what Una and Eve did, opened the whole thing up. And Ruth Maxwell, who started the whole thing by getting a group together to look at kind of what we could all do. So Stalking in Ireland has really taken off. Between last year and this year, we've been contacted and dealt with on an ongoing basis over 100 victims of stalking.
What we've done here.
My wish would be that more services would be provided. That would be a big national awareness campaign, and I mean a national awareness campaign. I don't mean one that's based in Dublin, that they call a national campaign and that doesn't see a bus shelter outside of Dublin. I mean a very serious one, because as you can see from what Una and Eve has said over the past 2 years, over and over again, the impact of this on people is horrendous, on their life, day and night, wondering, is he going to be there? Is she going to be there? Are they online? What's happening? And people think they're just losing their mind. So they take it really seriously. And I really welcome this research. And I think we did get a small piece of funding from TUSLA, which paid for the research, paid for the publishing and the printing. And Amy O'Leary, who works with us, did a lot of the design. I think she needs a lot of credit, because when we work together, things can change. But I think everybody involved has been phenomenal, really everybody.
Thanks very much, Mary. And I think what you highlighted, and certainly from the media kind of engagement today, is I think what this research has done for us, it has provided us with proper labels now. So we can identify behaviours particularly, and that will open up, that will help generate awareness as to what constitutes stalking. So it isn't a foreign concept anymore. It has very real behaviours attached to it, which we can list and expose as being problematic. And that should help inform our training and education piece, and especially training with the with members of Garda Síochána. Hopefully it'll encourage and empower people to come forward as well, because again, it might resonate. They might now recognise the behaviours as being problematic, not questioning themselves or having those inherent implicit victim blaming attitudes themselves about, is it just me? Am I just kind of going a bit mad here? But being able to call out these behaviours specifically for what they are and before they escalate. So I think it's done that today, and that would be really helpful. And what Una and Eve have done is personalised it in a way that people can resonate with and identify with their stories. And again, as we have said at the outset, it's as a direct result of their stories that has prompted this research, because we did, as Rebecca suggests, want to provide an evidence base to support their stories, so that they weren't seen in isolation as just that stories that have affected just 2 individuals. We can tell now that this is a serious issue that affects very many people, and in fact more will now come forward because they will have the language to articulate those behaviours in a way that will be heard, I think, in a different way now.
I suppose one thing I would like to ask the other panel members is if they've had an opportunity to, read parts of the report. Did anything in particular resonate with you that you maybe like to share?
Yeah,
I might come in there, Catherine.
Rebecca?
Yeah, just to say, in relation to, it resonated strongly with me, the need for training for members of Garda Síochána who are dealing with people who are victims of stalking behaviour. And I think that training and support services, when we're talking about legal rights and legal obligations, we must always remember that under European Union law, which is Irish law, the Victims Directive is very clear around the need for there to be both supports for victims of gender-based violence, but also for there to be training for practitioners who are engaged with victims of gender-based violence, and all victims. So, the rights are there at a European level. And when you look at the 2017 criminal justice legislation in Ireland, I'm not sure the degree to which those elements made it through. But in my own experience, in having done an awful lot of training with Garda Síochána, I think that it is important for them to have the specialist training. They are required to have a grasp of a vast array of criminal justice provisions and evidential provisions, and I have found them to be very receptive to learning about the dynamics of abuse. And it is a complex offence, and I thought you really captured it well when you were talking about the incident-based model versus the pattern of offending, because it's very straightforward to investigate a robbery in a service station. It has happened at one moment in time, and it's from a workload point of view for them, they could get an investigation in relation to that completed very quickly, but perhaps they don't appreciate the macro level, that the full extent of the offending can only be appreciated when you step back from it and look backwards. So it is a complex offence, and they need to understand the dynamics of it.
Lisa, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I'll give you some of my own observations. I was going to mention the Gardaí as well, as Rebecca did. I would have some concerns. I mean, obviously, when we get the legislation passed, that's fantastic, and that's a key milestone for us. But the application of that law and the enforcement of it are different things. And, when we look at the different experience that both Eve and Una had, so as Una has often said, the Gardaí were exemplary and were very quick to respond, and she might not be here today had they not been so good and on the ball. Whereas in Eve McDougall's case, she had a different experience in that every time she rang the Gardaí, it was a different guard at the end of the phone or somebody else that she was talking to, and she was having to re-explain herself on every occasion. So that's just I mean, you just lose the will at that point when you're consistently having to re-explain the story. So what we want to have is a situation where it's not pot luck what kind of service you get or what kind of response you get depending on where you live in the country. That is uniformity of service from the Gardaí. And that's not, I mean, I'm not putting the Gardaí down when I say that. They would say the same thing themselves. In more recent times, there's been a push, and there's been, I suppose, the Gardaí are being pulled in different directions, and there's a greater focus in the last number of years on, say, for example, domestic violence or violence against women, and having specialist Gardaí unit to deal with that and specialist training. But the numbers of Gardaí have not really increased that much in line with the additional services and that we're requiring them to provide to the state. So I think we need to just keep a watching brief on this area. We've raised this directly with the Minister, Una, Eve and I, on the need to train Gardaí and to ensure that that level of service is the same across the country. And then just as well, the point around, and I think, Mary, you might have made this point as well, around service providers. The more the word gets out that these offences are criminal and that you can come and make a complaint about it, the more we will have people looking for services. So there isn't really a huge level of service there currently. We're still building up refuge places, for example. We're not anywhere near where the Istanbul Convention requires us to be. We've made progress, and that's welcome, and I want to acknowledge that from the Justice Minister, but we're still short in refuge spaces, still places in the country where there isn't any space or sufficient space. So it's those types of things, the wraparound services and the Garda response, that we need to see now a greater focus on.
Can I come in there? I was just going to say about the awareness campaign, which needs to really educate people about what stalking is, because too often it's minimised, and people kind of feel, is this really stalking? Or they might say, the friend might say to one year, I was so lucky that I had somebody kind of following me and kind of wanting to be with me that much, or kind of saying he just really loves you and he's after you, this kind of thing. So people doubt themselves so much, and they go through a huge hell of a time for quite a long time before they feel they can talk to anybody. So, I mean, my ask would be that any family, friend, victim, anybody who needs help or needs support or needs information, contact the services. I agree with you, Lisa, they're kind of not there. I know the one we're running, Stalking in Ireland, and all the councils here have been trained. We'll do our best, but we will, talk to you or refer you. But I think if families knew the devastation of it, they'd be wide open to doing something, but very often they don't get it, because it isn't talked about. It's kind of seen as not a big deal.
Yeah, can I say something? I'm just joining you for the first time.
Sorry there, Bridget, do you mind if we hold off, because we want to not record any of the Q&A from the public. It's just so we will be opening it up for questions in just a few minutes. If you don't, yes, that's no problem at all. Great. So, Una, did you want to pop in there at all in respect of the contents of the report?
Yeah, I suppose I read the report, obviously, cover to cover, and it was very good. I suppose there was nothing really that surprised me in it, in as much as for the percentages. But I do think that it's way more prevalent. I know it wasn't a national survey as such, so I reckon this is really only the tip of the iceberg. Those that 1,000 people who did it in that short period of time. I reckon there's tens of thousands that it's happening to. And I had a meeting this morning with the chief superintendent, and they're very eager to learn how to deal with stalking cases and how to actually get better. And as he said himself, he said the Garda station that you go into is only as good as the first person you meet. If you meet somebody and they treat you well, great. But if you meet somebody, and no matter how good the people in the background are, their detectives, their inspectors are, if they put you off reporting, it's no good. So it has to be really across the board with the training. And there's a lot of just basic cop on as well. If you see somebody upset, treat them with a bit of empathy. And the superintendent said that what they instill in people is treat this person as if they were your sister or your brother or your mother or your daughter. Treat them the exact same way as you would treat a family member, because otherwise, they said, you're not doing them justice. So I think they are very keen to learn on how to do this. And I definitely think, as Mary said, you know, oh, you should be so lucky that someone would fancy or whatever. That whole viewpoint has to change, and I think that will only change with education, and education will only come from doing a huge, massive national campaign, because it is romanticized, and it is, oh yeah, he fancies you and he only wants to be with you. But it's a very, very dangerous situation to be in, and that whole attitude towards it is what needs to change.
Great. Do you have any questions that you'd like to add? Any additional questions for our panelists?
No, just thank all the panelists, and just say the report will of course be available for public consumption. Catherine is just going to put the link directly into the chat right now for everybody to have access to it. I think we'd be happy to open up to questions to the floor. Again, just to recognise and thank everybody's participation. I'm sure we'll have more questions once the report you know, is out in the public domain, and hopefully it will inform some of that training, those needs. But certainly Catherine and I would be very keen to help inform any kind of public campaigns based on the recommendations and some of the detail. And we should just say, I mean, we still have an awful lot of data and really important information that we want to get deeper into in terms of the responses from the respondents. We'll have shared a few of those qualitative quotes. I think once we get into that qualitative piece, that'll be really revealing also in terms of the extent and the seriousness of the crime, as Mary alludes to, and we will be able to highlight to Garda Síochána the real risk that is associated and attached to these behaviours. So thanks very much. I think we'll probably have plenty of questions, so we might stop recording for now, and we can